And we have the prayer. See, the thing is, though, I have to admit people. Okay, so let's take the prayer and let's recite the prayer. Master of all worlds, highest power, merciful parent
of compassion,
in
in your presence eternal, source of strength for us, as you have been for our ancestors. We very humbly acknowledge you.
What are we?
What are we?
What is
our life that you have done such great kindness to us?
Therefore,
we place our appeals before you, so that you may forgive and absolve us of all our faults and failings. Let our faults never become barriers between us and you, and may it be your desire to prepare our hearts to feel awe and love for you. May you listen to these words of ours, and may you open our encumbered hearts to the mysteries of your Torah. May this, our study, be a source of pleasure before your throne of glory, like sweet incense. May you shower down upon us the light of our soul's source in all the ways by which we define ourselves. May the sparks of your holy servants, through whom you have revealed these words to the world, shine and sparkle. May their merit, their ancestors' merit, and the merit of their Torah, their innocence and their holiness, stand for us so as to prevent us from stumbling when we study these words.
in their
In their
merit,
merit, may our eyes be illumined by what we study, as in the saying of the sweet singer of Israel. Open my eyes that I may gaze into wonders of your Torah. May the words of my mouth and the thoughts of my heart be acceptable to you, my rock and my redeemer. For it is the eternal who grants wisdom. It is from his mouth that knowledge and understanding issue forth.
na 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 na
Na, 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 na,
Ana na 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 We're on page 279, and we're beginning the next step in the Zohar's discussion of this new episode in the story of Isaac and Rebecca, and eventually we'll get to Jacob and Esau, just like the Torah will. But right now there's a pause. That story was introduced, but now there's a pause. And as we were beginning to look back at 275, the section which begins, there was a famine in the land. Right, so this is the episode of Isaac and Rebecca. There's no mention of the children, so we have no idea chronologically, did this happen before, did this happen after, at least from the way it's presented, but it happens here in the middle of after introducing the birth of Jacob, of Jacob and Esau. But this is now focusing again only on Isaac and Rebecca for a couple of moments. And there's a famine, and he's going to leave the country, and he's intending to do exactly what Abraham did, which was to go down to Egypt. But God stops him and says, don't leave the land of Israel, but you have to go someplace where you'll be able to get some support. So go to the Philistine territory of the land of Israel. So he goes to Gerar. So the Philistine territory is on the coastal, the southern coastal part of Israel today. So where Ashdod, Ashkelon is, those places. So he goes to Avimelech, the king of Gerar, and we have then now they repeat the similar story of when they get there. He says, he introduces Rebecca not as his wife. So that's where we're on. We're at when the men of the place asked. Who's going to read for us this evening, please? Beryl, there you go.
When the men of the place asked about his wife, he said, she is my sister, just as Abraham had said, because Shekhinah accompanied him with his wife, and on account of Shekhinah, he said this, as is written, say to wisdom, you are my sister. So he was emboldened to say, she is my sister. Further, Abraham and Isaac were entitled to this precisely because of the verse, my sister, my love, my dove, my perfect one. So it was certainly fitting for them to say, she is my sister. Thereby the righteous embrace the blessed Holy One.
Okay, so and we'll So we have the similar situation again as with Abraham, and what seems to be a lie, the Zohar is at pains to try to explain away. So, and we had a long discussion back with Abraham. How could Abraham do this? How could Abraham say the things that he said, even if he meant one thing, the other people were hearing a certain thing. All of that we had already, and now we're just going to go real quick with it. And Isaac says, "She is my sister." Who is he referring to?
Shekhinah.
Shekhinah. He's referring to Shekhinah. So even though they hear it as his saying this about Rebecca, but he's really saying that Shekhinah is my sister, as we have in Proverbs and in Song of Songs, the intimate relationship, the loving, endearing relationship that the singer of the song, or in Proverbs, this is the advice: make wisdom. And wisdom for the rabbis and for the Zohar, wisdom means the Torah, which is here Torah Shebal Peh, which is Shekhinah. Make her endeared to you and close to you like your own sister. So she's your sister. So we have it just like in Proverbs. Say to wisdom, Achotiat, you're my sister. So of course he could say that. And then in the Song of Songs we have the more impassioned idea. So therefore it's okay for them to say it, they're not lying. And thereby the righteous embrace the Blessed Holy One. So the Blessed Holy One for the Zohar is not Shekhinah. The Blessed Holy One is another aspect of the divine array, but this is how you embrace God in all of God's manifestations, is through Shekhinah. So by clinging and seeking closeness with Shekhinah, that's how we get close to God in general. Okay. Let's go to the next.
When he had been there a long time, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, gazed through the window and saw, here was Isaac, Metzachek et Rivka Ishto, fondling Rebecca his wife, et Rivka Ishto, precisely. This is Shekhinah, just as concerning idolatry it is written, they litzahek.
They rose, litzahek.
Litzahek, to revel. So too, metzahek, fondling, et Shekhinah, who accompanied Rebecca.
Okay, so that's the next verse. It says that after there were a long, after being there a long time, many days, Abimelech looked through the window. Vayar b'nei Yitzchak mitzachek et Rivka ishto. So in the Hebrew, of course, we have a play on words. The word Yitzchak and the word mitzachek come from the same root of tzchok, which is laughter, and enjoyment, and happiness. So Yitzchak is playing around with his wife. And then Abimelech guesses the truth, and then he gets very upset, and we have an encounter where he challenges Yitzchak, how dare you lie to us? But before we get to that part, this is the scene. And of course, as we've noted many times in many contexts when we've done Torah readings and learned this and read this Torah portion, Yitzchak, we already had it. Yitzchak is the one who is the first person who is said to love his wife, and here he physically, erotically is engaged with his beloved. He's a red-blooded guy, and Abimelech sees this. So how do we read this? So the word metzachek, which as rhymes with, so to speak, is part of the word Yitzchak himself. Isaac, his name is Yitzchak. He will be the one to laugh. He will be the one to enjoy, be happy. He's enjoying his wife. And they explain it again. this is Shekhinah that he's enjoying. God forbid we should think that he's being such a lech, but rather it's Shekhinah. And the word mitzachek, they say, look, we have it at the golden calf. At the golden calf episode, where we have the children of Israel engaging in idol worship, it says vayakumu litzachek. And after they made the golden calf, they all arose to have a revelry, to have a celebration around the golden calf. So, and there is, of course, the sexual connotations there as well. So, but of course, back here for the Zohar, trying to sidestep that a little bit, to be passionately engaged in idolatry is just the other side of being passionately engaged in worshiping God. So, I mean, we have the passion. The question is where we turn it to. So the Yitzchak was turning his passion to be close to God. He was turning it actively in that direction. So now the question is, what about Rivka? How do we read that he's apparently playing around with Rivka? So the answer is no, but it says et Rivka. It says et Rivka. So of course we've talked about this many times, what the word et can signify, and actually here the word et is not meaningless. But let's look at the note 166.
Et Rivka ishto, precisely. This is Shekhinah. Grammatically, the accusative particle has no ascertainable independent sense, but Nahum of Gimzo and his disciple Rabbi Akiva taught that when et appears in a biblical verse, it amplifies the original meaning. Where am I? In Zohar, the word et symbolizes Shekhinah, who comprises the entire alphabet of divine speech, from Aleph to Tav. See the Christian parallel in Revelation. I am Alpha and Omega.
Right, the beginning and the end. So this note occurs many times. The translation of the notes that we have here from Danny Matt is an astounding, huge accomplishment. Partly he's able to do this in the computer age by when he makes a note one place, he can keep on reapplying that note any other place that it's appropriate. So here, a note that he's written many times before with regard to et, he applies here. The one little quibble I would have here is that it doesn't exactly apply here, because this is not an accusative particle. This is et, meaning with, along with. He is playing around along with Rivka, right? Mitzachek et Rivka ishto. So it should have been noted. But anyway, the point is that for the Zohar, et is spelled Aleph and Taf. Aleph is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and Taf is the last. So therefore, et is a perfect word to signify Shekhinah, who is the both the last of the manifestations of the divine within the divine, and the first moment of God interacting with the non-divine. So, and she, of course, encompasses all of the divine within her. So et is a good word for Shekhinah. So therefore, what we have here is who accompanied Rivka, right? Et Rivka. Along with Rivka is Shekhinah. So that's one way to read it. Perhaps this is too basic a question. Something you've addressed, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. I can't read the rest of it. Hold on a second. I got to find the chat of what you said. Sorry, I'm a little clunky about this. Where is it? It's up here. No, it's not there. Wait, I got to find the chat. I got to find the chat. Where's the chat?
I'll read it. Perhaps this is too basic a question and something you've addressed before.
It is.
Why the need
forget it.
to lie
And sorry, no, just joking. I'm just thinking.
And then say that Rivka is Yitzhak's sister?
Say that again. Wait. Why not? Why what?
Where am I? But why the need to even lie and say that Rivka is Yitzhak's sister?
Mm-hmm.
And just say because.
Just say because. Because what?
I gave you an out. You can just say because.
Oh, no. So the idea is that this replicates the same experience that Abraham and Sarah had. And the understanding we should have is that Isaac is afraid that Rebecca will be abducted and taken into the king's harem, and he will be killed. If she is his wife, then he will have to be gotten rid of in order for the king to be able to take her because she's so beautiful, etc. Same way we had in Sarah's case, it's actually explained. In this case, it'll be explained post facto. When Avimelech gets angry, he will say, "What's wrong with you? How did you lie like that? We almost sinned with your wife. And we wouldn't do that if we knew she was your wife." Isaac thought, yes, they wouldn't do it with her being my wife because they would kill me. So that's how then she wouldn't be my wife anymore. He actually, in the biblical story, Avimelech presents himself as a righteous person who would never think of such a thing. But Isaac has inherited from Abraham that suspicion. So that's why he goes to those lengths. But again, for the Zohar, no, it's an occasion to talk more about the idea of Isaac's connection with Shekhinah. What the Zohar doesn't do, which we have played with, to use that word again, a number of times, is to see Rivka as Shekhinah, right? And in that sense, it's sort of softly said, right? Shekhinah who accompanied Rebecca, right? So Shekhinah is a garb of Rebecca, or Rebecca is enwrapped with Shekhinah, and therefore when he is clinging to Rivka, he's clinging to Shekhinah as well. Okay, good. And now we get a little more earthy. Next page.
Alternatively, would you ever imagine that Isaac copulated in the daytime? Really?
Nobody imagined that.
Surely we have learned Israelites are holy and do not copulate by day. Would Isaac, who was holy, have copulated by day? Rather, certainly Abimelech was learned and he gazed through astrology, which is a window. Here is written, through the window, and there is written, through the window she gazed, the mother of Sisera wailed. Just as there, through astrology, so here, through astrology. He saw that contrary to what Isaac had claimed, he was actually fondling her and she was his wife. So Abimelech called for Isaac and said, "But here, she is your wife. How could you say she is my sister?"
Right. Okay, so here we have a little interesting kind of way of trying to make sense of the story. As I said before, and as we have the quote, it says that Abimelech looked out through the window and saw Yitzchak playing around with his wife, Rebecca. So again, what does that mean in terms of the scene? We have to imagine the scene that somehow they are visible to Avimelech just from him looking out the window. So what is this? This is in public. This is clearly seeable. So the question that they say when they say in broad daylight, it conveys both of those things. First of all, that sexual relations should be modest and circumspect and be done in the dark. And secondly, it shouldn't certainly be done where anybody else can see it. So the in broad daylight means both of those things. And so the question is, how could Isaac and Rebecca be at all visible to Avimelech? Makes no sense. It sounds much too immodest. So therefore, they take the word window and they change it. Right? So what kind of window are we talking about? We're talking about a metaphorical window, right? We're talking about a window that lets you look out, not to what's immediately physically in front of you, but to be able to discern, some distant reality, whether it means spatially distant or temporally distant, or some other kind of way. So the example that they give is Sisera's mother. Sisera was the general who Deborah, the prophetess and the judge, led the Israelite armies against. And the Barak ben Avinoam was her man of commander, but she was the leader. And Sisera was the general on the other side, and she sings a long song, the Song of Deborah, which is the Haftorah that we have for Shabbat Shirah, the Shabbat when we read about the song at the Red Sea, and she celebrates the victory, the military victory, and it's a whole complicated song. It's got a lot of stuff, a lot of different elements in it, but in there she says that like she really is glorying in the comeuppance that Sisera got, and she said they were so sure that they were going to wipe the floor with us. They were so sure that they were going to be victorious, and they were going to cut us to pieces. And Sisera's own mother was cheering that he's going to destroy people, and it gets pretty gruesome, cutting up people's wombs and so on. And she looked through the window and she started crying. So Sisera's mother is not anywhere near the battlefield. So what does it mean that she looked through the window? She had to look through the crystal ball. She had to look through some kind of occult way of perceiving what was happening so far away from her. And she saw that her son was killed. And not only that, he was killed by a woman yet. What a shame, what an embarrassment. He was killed by Yael. So this is like the precursor of the Judith and Holofernes story. So anyway, she's looking through the window and she starts crying. By the way, it's Rosh Chodesh Elul. We're a month now away from Rosh Hashanah. And on Rosh Hashanah, we have the mitzvah of blowing shofar. So the Torah doesn't tell us what we're supposed to do in terms of blowing shofar. How are the notes how are they supposed to come out? How many, and so on. So the rabbinic working out of this whole system, and we have all kinds of discussions what sound should come out, and as a result we have all these different sounds. We have the tkiya, the simple sound, the straight sound, and then we have the shvarim, which is 3 broken sounds, and then we have the trua, which is 9 rapid sounds, and then we mix them together, the shvarim trua, when we do all of it at the same time. I mean, not at the same time, but when in a row. So all of these are different discussions that the rabbis have. The Torah tells us nothing about this. But the rabbis say, how many should we do? And they say we should really do 100. And they derive it from Sisera's mother. From Sisera's mother. Because they read the verse in the in Devorah's song, and they calculate, as a result of the way her crying is described, that she cried 100 wailings. So our wailings on Rosh Hashanah owe, in a paradoxical kind of way, owe their form and format in an important way to Sisera's mother, right? And on the one hand, her crying and her pain is for Deborah a moment of sweet revenge. Ha! You wanted to massacre us, you wanted to crush us, you wanted to mutilate us. Now you're crying. But what the rabbis do actually by doing this is they also kind of a little bit bring back some of the humanity, the basic primal crying of any human being, even Sisera's mother, who was relishing the idea that we would be slaughtered and decimated. She's also capable of pain that we can recognize, and that models our own begging God to be merciful and to judge us favorably. So it's very complicated. It's a mix here of emotions and judgments and what can I say? And judgments in the sense of sensing right and wrong in many different kinds of vectors going back and forth. But anyway, back to here. So the window clearly can't be a physical window looking out right outside my window, because Sisera's mother was far, far away. So it's a window like a crystal ball. So the same thing we apply now to Avimelech. Of course, Yitzchak and Rivka couldn't be seen by any real person. Of course, they were engaged in copulating modestly, privately. But Avimelech was able, through his own magic, to see through the walls, right? So he could be a peeping Tom through magic. So on the one hand, this sort of rescues Isaac and Rebecca from being too licentious, or I don't know what you want to call it, too public in their lovemaking. On the other hand, now we get back to real lovemaking. No, this is not Isaac fondling Shekhinah. This is not Isaac engaged in some kind of wonderful, passionate, and exciting spiritual experience. This is Isaac sleeping with Rebecca. This is Isaac and Rebecca having a joyful, erotic experience together. It's just that it was nobody else's business, right? And then Avimelech intrudes through his own magical way. So there's a ridiculousness to it, but there's also an acknowledgement of getting back to the basics and actually acknowledging the Torah's simple meaning, which is, yes, they were actually physically together. Okay, so then when Avimelech sees this, and it's, again, I think in terms of the story, it's very rich. By peeping into their private lives, he's curious about it somehow. It's not explained why he's actually doing that, but okay, maybe he did this with every stranger. Maybe this is a little bit of Big Brother is watching. Big Brother tries. There is no privacy in an authoritarian regime. The powers that be are always looking at everybody and trying to find out every single private detail that they can possibly find out. And yet at the same time, what happens when he finds out? He's morally outraged. He says, "How dare you? What is?" He's called out for Isaac. But here she's your wife. How could you say she's my sister? How could you lie to me? So again, this is a rich story, which each and every one of us can read as we wish. Do we take him as being absolutely honest and sincere? Do we take him as being just the kind of authoritarian bully that Isaac was afraid of? And he's using irony here, and he's using morality, as a game. I mean, this is up for each of us to choose how we want to read it. Okay. So, Rabbi Yossi.
Rabbi Yossi said Abimelech would have been justified in doing to Isaac what he did to Abraham, were it not that the Blessed Holy One had reproved him previously. Come and see what is written, because I said to myself, there is just no fear of God in this place. Rabbi Abba said, therefore he said, she is my sister. To cleave to Shekhinah, as is written, say to wisdom, you are my sister. Why? because they lacked faith. If they had possessed faith, he would not have had to. But since they didn't, he said so. Therefore he said, because I said to myself, there is just no fear of God in this place. Fear of God is true.
Right. Good. Sorry to cut you off like that. So this is following closely the exchange between Isaac and Avimelech, and folding into it the encounter between Abraham and Avimelech. Right. So the permission for this is the kind of negative statement that the Torah says. This was a famine, but it wasn't the same famine that happened with Abraham. This is a separate famine for Isaac. So on the one hand, it's a separating of the stories. On the other hand, as we said before, as I was mentioning about why he says she's my sister is the replication of the other story. We take from that other story a lot material to bring it back over to here. So we use whatever's missing here. We use it for whatever's missing here. We use whatever's over there. So the idea there's just no fear of God in this place. That's Abraham's justification. Rak ein yirat Elokim b'makom hazeh. That's what Abraham says to Avimelech. Why did he lie to Avimelech? Because Avimelech also complained to Abraham. Why don't you just be straight with us? Why don't you just tell us? And God forbid, none of us would have done anything. So let's go back to Rabbi Yossi. So he says Avimelech would have been justified in doing to Isaac what he did to Abraham. So we're conflating. This is the same Avimelech. It's not clear that this is the same Avimelech. Some Bible readers say Avimelech is like Pharaoh. The name Pharaoh applies to every single ruler of Egypt. Right? And then you find out which, Pharaoh Necho, Pharaoh this one, Pharaoh that one. So, but Pharaoh is the general term for the king. The word Avimelech is understood to be for the Philistines a kind of a general name for whatever king. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's the same person per se, but here the Zohar is saying it's the same. Okay, so read note 170, please.
Abimelech would have been justified. Since Isaac had not informed Abimelech that Rebekah was his wife, Abimelech would have been justified in taking her for himself, were it not that God had already reprimanded him in the case of Abraham.
Okay, so this is again the Zohar taking both of these stories and gluing them together. If Abimelech already learned his lesson from the previous story with Abraham, God appears to Avimelech in the story with Abraham. Here there is no God mention at all, right? But in the story with Avimelech and Abraham, God appears to Avimelech that in the nighttime, in a dream. Avimelech has taken Sarah into his space, into his palace, whatever, and God says, "Don't you dare touch that woman. Don't you dare touch that woman. That woman is married to that holy man." So then Avimelech the next day, he wakes up and he's all upset that and says to Abraham, "What's wrong with you? Why did you get me into so much trouble?" And Abraham said, "Rak ein yirat Elokim b'makom hazeh." The reason is because there's just no fear of God here. So that's why I had to lie. So here, the same thing, Rabbi Yossi says, had Avimelech not been warned ahead of time, he would have been justified to punish Isaac and take away Rebekah, because Isaac was not straight with him. Right? In punishment for lying to the authorities, Avimelech could have disposed of Isaac and taken Rebekah for himself. Not because he would have done it anyway, but really because of Isaac's shortcoming. So that's a pretty striking claim, right? It sounds like that Isaac is being blamed, right? Isaac is certainly, in the eyes of Avimelech, in the wrong, right? Avimelech says, why did you do this? Why couldn't you come out and straight and tell us the truth? So Avimelech is absolutely complaining about Isaac's behavior, and would have been, in his own eyes, totally justified in punishing Isaac. However, says Rabbi Yossi, but he's afraid of Isaac. He's afraid because of what God has already said to him back in the previous iteration of this story. Well, so now what do we do with this next thing? Come and see what is written. Because I said to myself, there is no fear of God in this place. So is that so? Is that really true? You know, and we've talked about it, like I said, whenever we read the Torah reading, we should be able one day to be able to read the Torah reading in Shul again soon. But when we read the Torah reading, we've had this discussion with the Abraham story also. Is Abraham right in his judgment that there is no fear of God, when actually the story presents it as a very plausible possibility that, yes, there is a fear of God. Abimelech wants to listen to God. Abimelech has this revelation from God and abides by God's instructions. So the question, you know, is whose perception here is correct? So now, again, if we apply, there's no fear of God in this place, we take the words of Abraham and we give it to Isaac. Isaac is convinced that there is no fear of God in this place, right? That's what now Rabbi Abba says. So of course, that's why Isaac was entitled to lie, right? He had to lie. Therefore, he said, she's my sister, leaving to Shekhinah, because they lacked faith. If they had possessed faith, he would have not had to. Since they didn't, he said so, right? Because they didn't have faith, they didn't have fear of God, therefore he had to say what he said. Now, Rabbi Abba is combining both of these ways of reading, she's my sister. He's lying to them, but he's telling the truth with regard to holding on to Shekhinah. She's my sister is Shekhinah. And what Isaac is saying is, you don't believe in God. You don't have faith in God. You don't adhere to God's principles. But I do. And therefore, I'm going to have to lie to you. This brings us back to the whole story we had earlier about how do you deal with evil people. And sometimes you have to be sneaky, conniving. That's Yaakov. But here we see that it's really his father as well. Doing this. So that's what Isaac feels compelled now to do. He has to sort of do double speak in order to outmaneuver these people who have no fear of God. So I want to ask it again. Is that really true? Is that really true that he has no fear of God? Let's read what Rabbi Yossi said again. You have Rabbi Yossi said right in the middle.
Yossi said, Abimelech would have been justified in doing to Isaac what he did to Abraham, were it not that the Blessed Holy One had reproved him previously.
So what does that mean? What it means to me is that there is fear of God. Abimelech would have, zapped Isaac with a punishment, maybe even off with his head, taking Rivka away from him. But he didn't. Why? Because God told him not to. Because he learned that God doesn't want him to do that when he had the opportunity with Abraham. Sounds to me like Avimelech has a certain elemental fear of God, doesn't he? I mean, I think that what we have here is a very complicated dance here of perceptions. How do we actually understand the perceptions of each of these players, and how do we credit their perceptions? Do we think that they're right in their perceptions? Are their perceptions accurate? Or do we know better? Or do we not know better? Is the Zohar playing the traditional demonization game of the Goyim? Of course, Avimelech is a low life. Of course, he has no fear of God. Nobody does. If Abraham said there's no fear of God, so of course Abraham is right. Who would ever think that Abraham could be wrong? And yet, the Zohar here is opening a crack into that possibility. If not for Abraham, then certainly with Isaac. If Avimelech is listening to God, then Avimelech is refraining from roughing up Isaac because of God's communication to him. That's literal fear of God. No, so it's not the highest level of, one second, it's not the highest level, of religious reverence and awe. It's just plain fear of God. Avimelech really does have fear of God, I would say. Yeah, Mark.
There's another sort of strange morality going on. Back to the Abraham story. You can't sleep with the guy's wife, but you can kill him in order to sleep with the guy's wife. And that has resonance with David, with King David. So, I mean, how does that work out? That's my comment.
Right. Yeah. So how does it work out? It works out by cutting, cutting fine distinctions. What David does, according to the story, is David doesn't kill Uriah Hachiti, Uriah the Hittite. He doesn't kill him. He makes sure that he will die. Right? He sends him into battle. Okay, so you're making a face, and I would make a face too. But nevertheless, that's the distinction. The distinction is that Avimelech, or or in Egypt, with Pharaoh in the first story of the Abraham has two stories, right? The fear is they're going to kill me. They're just going to kill me and get rid of me, and then they will have this woman. So you're right. I mean, obviously, it's a pretty ironic kind of morality, and and you're right. I think it's a very good point to bring David's story in juxtaposition. And I'm not saying it to say that David is a tzaddik. He's not a tzaddik. He says to Nathan, I really did sin, but he didn't sin that much. I mean, there's levels of morality even among murderers, and what David acknowledged to himself is, look, there's a battle going on. The guy is my vassal, and I am entitled to send him into battle. I'll send him into battle and literally kill two birds with one stone. He'll die, and then his wife will be mine. But I don't think it's far-fetched that human beings make those kinds of moral games for themselves.
All right. So by mentioning David, although you complimented me, I clouded my original issue. My original issue is, why is it okay to kill someone to take something that belongs to them, but it's wrong to take something that belongs to someone, assuming that the wife is a chattel? I mean, where does that morality come from?
I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, I'm just accepting that that's the way both Isaac and Abraham saw the morality of the neighboring peoples. That's how they read it. What I'm saying is, were they really right? But that's the way they saw it. They saw that that's how they judged these barbarians. I mean, they didn't see that. They're not defending that morality. They find it wrong. But they got to somehow save themselves from it, because that's what they think these other people actually are willing to do. Does that make any sense whatsoever? No, to me, it doesn't.
But that plugs into, they don't have fear of God. Because if the worst sin is the taking of a life, then they don't have fear of God, because they're willing to take a life. Now, they may have a fear of a taboo, So that may be one way to look at it.
Or, I mean, now that you're pushing it, if they don't kill the husband, then they're afraid the husband will seek revenge.
Okay.
Right?
So,
There's practical considerations. Maybe it's not about a moral distinction. Maybe they don't think it's okay to kill him, but not okay to sleep with his wife. They think that it's okay for them to do whatever they want, and they just have to do whatever they need to do to get away with it. So that would be another way to do it. But of course, you're right. So therefore, murder for them is nothing. Where we have that, if you want to a little bit keep on tying together these concepts, where we have fear of God being tied specifically to refusing to murder. Anybody know where that story is biblically? The midwives.
Yeah.
The Egyptian midwives. And depending on whether the Egyptian midwives are Egyptian or not, is another layer to where the Torah says they really did have fear of God. They wouldn't do what Pharaoh said to kill the male babies because they had fear of God. So it ties in exactly to what you're saying, right? And if we think that they're Egyptian, which is a totally possible reading of that story, then it's even more poignant, right? These are Egyptians that really do have a fear of God, despite all of the prevailing notions of some other way of calculating morality or not. And that's the basic, right? The basic is you don't kill. Right? The basic is you don't kill. Good. Shkoach. All right. So coming back to here, what Rabbi Abba does, as I said, is combine the religious way of reading, the spiritual way of reading his statement, with the confrontation with the society around him, to allow him to also say it in a kind of a straightforward way and lie to get to be able to save himself. Okay, Rabbi Elazar.
Rabbi Elazar said, since
wait, we're skipping over one interesting little thing, and that is, what do we think about that statement? Fear of God is faith. Okay, so in English, I would submit that we don't really see that as identical terms. And I again, assuming that I'm speaking for a lot of people, fear of God is not a fashionable term or value for a lot of us. Faith is also a pretty tricky term, but faith, I would say, has a softer kind of connotation for most of us than fear of God. No? Fear of God has struck everyone in the group. There's this total reverential silence. What can I say? So you have a little tiny note there, 173.
fear of God is faith, Shekhinah is characterized by awe or fear and known as
Mehemnuta.
Mehinuta, faith.
Okay, so that's correct, but it actually just opens the door to trying to understand this. It doesn't explain it. So the Shekhinah is characterized by awe or fear because she is very, very influenced by the left-hand side, right? She's very, very influenced by Yitzchak, by Pachad, by fear, by Din, by judgment, and so on. She is, almost, vulnerable to too much fear, and to the fearsome demonic as a result. Shekhinah is called Mehemnuta, faith, because faith for the Zohar is the capacity to include everything as one, to overcome contrasts, and to bring them all into harmony and union. That's what faith is. Faith is to finally get to the point that God is one, even though the world that we live in is so refracted that even if we see God in any particular part of God, a part of the world, we see only one aspect of God, and we don't see the other aspect of God. Echoes of maybe a little bit of Spinoza again, but we're not going there. But so we only see tiny little pieces of God. Faith for the Zohar, and it's called a mystery, Raza de Behemnuta. The mystery of faith, the secret of faith, is to be able to hold on to all of the contradictions as being aspects of the one. And that's because Shekhinah is the unifier of all the contradictions. Even though she's very, very susceptible to the left-hand side, she's also filled with the right-hand side. And she's filled with the central synthesizing forces that come down through the middle. She is the container of all the divine energies, no matter how conflicting they seem to be to us, no matter how contradictory they seem to us. Chesed and Gvura are contradictions, and yet she encompasses everything. And her capacity as a limitational being is actually what allows the faith to happen, because it's by pouring both from the right-hand side and the middle side and the left-hand side into the vessel, which is Shekhinah, that they all mix together. If Shekhinah was just a hollow tube, if Shekhinah was just a channel, then everything would just go flowing right through without being mixed, without being brought together. So Shekhinah's faith quality is actually enabled by her fear quality, right? Because fear, again, is limitation, is enclosure, is containment, and by her ability to contain, that's her ability to unify. Yeah, Len. No, you have to unmute. Enough with the limitations. Let it flow. Let the channel open up here. No, come on, hit the button there. Something. There's got to be, if you wiggle your thing, if you wiggle the cursor on the screen, a white strip at the bottom should come up, and your microphone icon should be in the middle, and it should be red with a line, and you can click, and you can click it with your mouse, and it'll unmute. What happens if I do this? Hold on, wait. Now I lost it. No, I want this. Wait, back to you. Hold on. 1 second. I can't do it. I can't unmute you. You have to unmute yourself. Sorry. Can somebody walk him through better instructions than what I just said? No. Plus they're doing it mutely. Shekhinah is speech. Shekhinah is being unmuted. Do you get a white band at the bottom? Oh, I think something just happened. Did you get a white band at the bottom? If you bring the cursor and you click it on the screen with all the pictures of everybody, does a white band come up? No. All right, sorry. Write it in the chat, like what Seth did. Okay, write it in the chat. Let's see what we can get. Seth, you wanted to say something?
Well, I lost my thought. Sorry.
All right, that's why you need containers. You need containers that hold them, then they hold them. They hold the thought. All right, so anyway, so back to here. So what the Zohar is saying is fear of God is faith. So one way of looking at it is what I was just saying. The other aspect that we need to understand is that this goes back to teachings in Tanakh itself, where we say Reshit Chochma Yirat Hashem. The very beginning of wisdom is fear of God. that without reverence, without that sense of something so much greater and so much more mysterious and unknowable, the faith that a person will have will not really be faith, because it'll be, cut down to size. It'll be customized to one's own set of dimensions, and that's not what faith is. What faith in the end is to encompass more than oneself, to encompass more than one's own ken, and so that's where the literal fear of God may come in. All right. So did you write something, Len? All right, Rabbi Elazar.
Rabbi Elazar, since Shekhinah does not dwell outside the land of Israel, there is no fear of God in this place, for this is not its site. It does not dwell here. But Isaac embraced faith, seeing Shekhinah dwelling in his wife. Abimelech commanded.
Wait. There's enough here to think about for a while. So
you didn't interrupt.
I was what can I say? I'm slow on the uptake here. So we have a principle that Shekhinah does not dwell outside the land of Israel. That principle was very important, for instance, when the Zohar talked all about Abraham's career, right? Why did Abraham have to get to the land of Israel? Because he couldn't connect up with Shekhinah no matter how hard he tried. With all of his own spiritual exertions, he had to get to the land of Israel before he could culminate in actually reaching God. So this was what the Zohar explained back there. It's based on older stories, based on older midrashim and rabbinic statements. We're coming up again, as I said, we're coming up to the Yamim Noraim, the days of awe. On Yom Kippur, we read the story of Jonah and the whale. And in the beginning, Jonah is charged by God to go and be a prophet to the people of Nineveh. And he doesn't want to do it. So he runs away. So this is the basis for the sages saying, why is he running away? He's running away because if he can get out of Israel, God won't speak to him anymore. There won't be any communication because God is in Israel. God is in the land of Israel, and there's no prophecy outside the land of Israel. Of course, we have a little problem with Ezekiel, who's in Babylonia. The Zohar solves that problem, but we don't have to solve it right now. But in general, all of the prophets are in the land. So Shekhinah dwells only inside the land of Israel. Now, says Rabbi Elazar, so that explains it. What do you expect? There is no Shekhinah outside the land, so how do you expect people to have a fear of God outside the land? Now, partly what he's reading this is that the word Yirat Elokim is now a term for Shekhinah. So it's not that people don't have fear of God. It is fear of God equals Shekhinah. Fear of God is a name of Shekhinah. So therefore, when Isaac said there is no fear of God here, what he's simply saying is there's no Shekhinah here. I'm connected to Shekhinah, and I have to double my efforts to be close to Shekhinah to overcome the lack of Shekhinah that's in this place. But of course, those kinds of images keep on turning back again into the moral, physical, human interactions that we're talking about. So if Shekhinah doesn't live here, how can you expect people to have reverence for Shekhinah? Yeah, Craig.
We've always been told that, I realize that Yitzchak is, by Avimelech, by Gerar, but I thought we were always told that Isaac never left Israel.
Okay. Beryl, where are you? Can you please answer Craig by reading note 175?
As soon as I find it. This is not its site. It does not dwell here. Technically, the land of the Philistines is included in the borders of Israel. But since it is not conclusively conquered until the reign of King David, its status is somewhat lower.
Etc. Okay, so you got it. All right, now you're happy. You look happy. So yes, yeah, because this is the paradox. On the one hand, he goes to the land of the Philistines precisely because it is the land of Israel. Because God says, don't leave the land of Israel. I'm not letting you go down to Egypt. I'm not letting you leave the land. So the land of the Philistines is absolutely part of the land of Israel. So when Rabbi Elazar says, well, Shekhinah is not outside, any place outside of Israel is not the land of Israel. So, what is that about? So, on the one hand, you've got an answer kind of like a technicality, sort of, but it's not that terrible an answer. I think somebody's making a lot of noise there. Somebody's washing the dishes or something. Glenn, you unmuted. I can't believe.
Yeah, I got it. Okay, so there's an equivalence then between Shekhinah and Yirat Hashem, right? Now, the phrase Pachad Yitzchak, could that be paired with Yirat Hashem? There's a symmetry there. Is there any meaning in that?
Absolutely, absolutely. That's the Pachad Yitzchak is what's feeding into Shekhinah. That's why I was saying the left side is so powerful within Shekhinah. It's coming at, that's the left side is Pachad Yitzchak, right? That's where Yitzchak is intense Pachad, and then it flows down into Shekhinah and gets mixed with everything else. But for sure, yes, that's the idea. What I want to, so just getting back to this complication here, if we take it for granted that if we don't get into the geography of the land of the Philistines itself, let's take Rabbi Elazar's, let's say the land of the Philistines isn't the land of Israel. What Rabbi Elazar is still saying is, if there's no Shekhinah, there's no fear of God, right? So besides it being a tautology, since fear of God equals Shekhinah, no fear of God. But he's not just saying that, like I said. He's also talking about the human experience. So the human experience of having reverence or even fear of God, part of what he's saying is that depends on the context. How can you expect people to have fear of God if they never experience fear of God? Or if they never experience God as God? How can you have reverence for something that you don't even know is, that you've never come in contact with? So this is, this is where, to take the idea that the land of the Philistines isn't conquered as the land of Israel until much later, is to talk about human experience. It's to talk about when things actually start taking place. Is the Isaac, for Isaac, wherever Isaac goes, Shekhinah is going to be there in the land of Israel. But what about everybody else that's living as his neighbors? Is the land of Israel full of Shekhinah for all of those other people? The answer is no. Right? What Rabbi Elazar is saying is, in a certain sense, he's saying, you can't have fear of God unless you have some intuition of God to begin with. Then maybe you have questions of where to find it, or how to intensify it, or how to isolate it and distill it and purify it, how to not lose it, how to reach for it. But there needs to be a contact point. There needs to be an opening. So what Rabbi Elazar is saying is, the realm that Yitzchak is walking into is a realm that never experienced that opening. So there is no fear of God because there is no Shekhinah there. So, this goes back to the famous statement that I've quoted, ad infinitum, when the Kotzker Rebbe said to his followers, "Where is God?" And they said, "Well, God is everywhere." I thought that's what the question you were going to ask, Craig. What do you mean the Shekhinah is only in the land of Israel? Isn't God everywhere? Isn't Shekhinah everywhere? Anyway, the Kotzker said, no, I'm not asking such a simple, silly question. God is not everywhere. God is only where you let God in. So this idea of that God is only as refracted through human contact, through human experience, is one of the great questions. If you don't have a sense of God knocking on the door or putting pressure on you to be let in, then how are you going to let God in? Somehow, somewhere, whether it's through people talking about it or people passing on a tradition. I mean, I talked about this last week in the Torah Sports. There has to be some priming of the pump in order for for the experience of God to become an experience of God. We have a rabbinic statement where they say it's based on a verse, and God says, "Atem Eidai, Ani Hashem." You are witnesses that I am God. And they break it down and they say, if you are witnesses to me, then I'm God. If you're not witnesses to me, then I'm not God. So, and again, the whole ending of the Shema, I took you out of Egypt to become your God. Right? I am God, but am I your God? And if a God speaks in the middle of a forest and nobody hears God, so is there God? That's part of the question here. Okay, we're going to stop here, and hopefully we'll be able to continue next week. Okay, sei gesund, everybody.
Thank you.
Right.